What if I told you that 13 children were being tortured in a suburban California home for decades, and not a single neighbor knew? What if I told you these children were so malnourished that police officers thought they were looking at young kids when some were actually adults in their 20s? What if I told you the parents took their starving children to Disneyland, renewed their wedding vows in Las Vegas multiple times, and posted smiling family photos on social media while their kids were chained to beds back home? This isn't fiction. This really happened. And it took one brave 17-year-old girl escaping through a window with a deactivated cell phone to expose the horror that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Welcome to The Secret Chronicles. I'm your host, and today we're investigating one of the most shocking child abuse cases in modern American history, the Turpin family case. 13 siblings who lived their entire lives imprisoned in their own home, starved, beaten, chained, and tortured by the two people who were supposed to protect them. Their parents, David and Louise Turpin. This isn't just about abuse. This is about how a house of horrors can exist in a normal suburban neighborhood for years without anyone noticing. How parents can torture their children while maintaining a facade of normalcy. And how one teenage girl's courageous escape finally brought justice. We're breaking this case into 5 chapters, each revealing the disturbing truth about what happened behind closed doors. Let's begin with Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The Perfect Family Illusion. Paris, California. A quiet suburban city about 70 miles southeast of Los Angeles. Middle-class neighborhoods, families with kids. The kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors and watches out for each other's children. At 160, Muir Woods Road sits a pale yellow single-story house that looks like every other house on the block. Nothing about it suggests horror. Nothing about it screams danger. Inside that house live David and Louise Turpin with their 13 children, ranging in age from toddlers to adults in their late 20s. 13 kids might seem unusual, but this is a religious family, and large families aren't unheard of in conservative communities. Neighbors occasionally see the children. They notice the kids are pale, thin, and quiet. They always move in a single-file line when they walk. They wear matching clothes, often Disney-themed outfits. They don't play outside like other kids. They don't go to school with other neighborhood children. When neighbors ask about them, David and Louise explain that they homeschool all 13 children for religious reasons. The family keeps to themselves, but they're polite when encountered. Odd, maybe, but not threatening. Some neighbors think the kids look malnourished, but they rationalize it away. Maybe they're just naturally thin. Maybe they have health conditions. Maybe it's not their place to judge another family's lifestyle. This is how abuse hides in plain sight. People see warning signs, but talk themselves out of acting on their instincts because they don't want to seem judgmental or intrusive. The Turpins aren't completely isolated from society. They take trips. They go to Disneyland and pose for photos with their children, everyone smiling and wearing matching Mickey Mouse shirts. They travel to Las Vegas, where David and Louise renew their wedding vows in Elvis-themed chapels, with all 13 children standing as witnesses. Louise posts photos on social media showing a happy, loving family, birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, children smiling at the camera in coordinated outfits. To anyone scrolling through those photos, the Turpins look like an eccentric but devoted family. Large, religious, old-fashioned, but ultimately harmless. The reality behind those smiles is unspeakable. David Allen Turpin, born in 1961, grew up in a religious household and met Louise when they were teenagers. They married young and immediately began having children. By the time they moved to California in 2010, they had 13 kids, ranging from infants to adults. David worked as an engineer for Northrop Grumman and later Lockheed Martin, earning a decent income. They weren't poor. This wasn't a case of poverty driving abuse. They had money for Disneyland trips and Las Vegas renewals of vows. But inside the Muir Woods Roadhouse, money wasn't being spent on food, clothing, or medical care for the children. It was being spent on padlocks, chains, and cameras to monitor the children's every move. Louise, who had been homeschooling the children, wasn't teaching them academics. She was teaching them obedience through torture. She was their warden, and David was the enforcer of their prison. For years, this went on. The children grew up knowing nothing but captivity, starvation, and abuse. The older ones, who should have been adults living independent lives, were still trapped, still being treated like disobedient toddlers who needed constant punishment. And no one outside that house had any idea what was really happening. Chapter 2: The House of Horrors. When police eventually entered the Turpin home in January 2018, what they found was so disturbing that seasoned officers who had worked violent crimes for years were traumatized by the scene. The smell hit them first: rotting garbage, unwashed bodies, human waste, and decay. The kind of smell that makes your eyes water and your stomach turn. Then they saw the children. 13 human beings in various states of malnourishment and neglect, some chained to beds, some huddled in corners, all terrified. The children ranged in age from 2 to 29 years old, but officers couldn't initially tell who was an adult and who was a child. The 29-year-old weighed only 82 pounds. The 11-year-old weighed 70 pounds. Their growth had been so stunted by malnutrition that adults looked like elementary school children. The house itself was a maze of filth and squalor, trash piled in corners, food rotting on counters, bathrooms covered in waste, bedrooms with multiple children chained to furniture, unable to move more than a few feet. David and Louise had created an entire system of torture disguised as discipline. The rules in the Turpin household were designed not to teach children how to behave, but to give the parents excuses to inflict pain. Children were only allowed to eat 1 meal per day, usually a small portion that left them constantly hungry. If they took food without permission, even just a cracker or a piece of fruit, they would be beaten or chained to their beds for weeks. The parents would deliberately taunt them by buying pies, cakes, and other foods, and leaving them out on the counter where the children could see and smell them, but couldn't eat them. They would watch their starving children stare at food just out of reach. Showers were strictly rationed. Children were sometimes allowed to bathe only once per year. If they washed their hands or face too often, it was considered wasting water, and they would be punished. The children weren't allowed to play, talk loudly, or interact with each other without permission. They couldn't leave their rooms without asking. They couldn't use the bathroom without permission. If they broke any of these arbitrary rules, the punishments were severe. David would beat them, strangle them until they lost consciousness, or chain them to their beds for months at a time. The chains were padlocked, and only the parents had keys. Louise would film these punishments, creating home videos that documented years of systematic torture. She would laugh while filming her children crying in pain. The older children, who should have been adults living independent lives, were treated exactly the same as the younger ones. The 29-year-old was just as controlled, just as abused as the toddler. In David and Louise's twisted worldview, their children would always be children who needed constant discipline and control. The parents justified all of this as religious discipline. They claimed they were raising their children God's way, and that strict punishment was necessary to keep them on the righteous path. But there's nothing in any religious text that commands parents to starve, chain, and torture their children. This was sadism dressed up as faith. The children had no education beyond basic literacy. The older ones could read and write, but had no understanding of math, science, history, or anything that would help them function in society. They'd never been to a doctor or dentist. They had no concept of the outside world beyond what they glimpsed during rare family outings. They didn't know their own address. They didn't understand how money worked. They didn't know what police officers were or what they did. Their entire universe was that house, those rooms, those chains. And their parents had convinced them this was normal, that this was how all families lived. Chapter 3: The Escape. Jordan Turpin was 17 years old in January 2018, but she looked much younger due to severe malnutrition. She'd lived her entire life in captivity, knowing nothing but abuse and control. But Jordan had something her parents couldn't completely suppress: curiosity and hope. She'd found a deactivated cell phone that her parents had thrown away. The phone couldn't make regular calls, but Jordan discovered it could still dial 911. She'd been planning her escape for 2 years, gathering courage, waiting for the right moment. On January 14, 2018, that moment arrived. In the early morning hours, while her parents were asleep and her siblings were locked in their rooms, Jordan climbed out of a window. She'd never been outside alone before. She didn't know her address. She didn't know how to navigate streets or who to trust. But she knew she had to try. Her hands shaking, Jordan dialed 911 on the deactivated phone. The dispatcher answered, and Jordan began trying to explain what was happening. Her voice was small, childlike, trembling with fear that her parents would discover she was gone. The dispatcher had trouble understanding her at first. Jordan spoke in broken sentences, struggling to explain years of abuse in a few words. Then she said something that made the dispatcher's blood run cold. "My parents are abusive. They abuse us, and my 2 little sisters are chained up right now." The dispatcher kept Jordan on the line, trying to get more information while sending police to her location. Jordan described the house, gave approximate numbers of siblings, tried to explain the chains and starvation. Officers arrived within minutes and found Jordan standing outside, terrified and confused, but determined to help her siblings. She led them back to the house. When police knocked on the door, David answered, calm and cooperative, as if nothing was wrong. He invited officers inside with a smile. Then they saw the children. Officer Alexandra Newland later testified that when she first saw the Turpin children, she thought they were all young kids. "Then I noticed one had gray hair and wrinkles. I realized some of them were actually adults." The children were so shocked by the presence of strangers in their house that they couldn't speak. They just stared with hollow eyes, unsure if these uniformed people were there to help or hurt them. Officers found 2 girls chained to their beds, just as Jordan had reported. The chains were short, allowing only minimal movement. The girls looked at the officers with expressions that broke hearts, a mixture of hope and terror. David and Louise were immediately arrested. They showed no emotion, no remorse, no concern for their children. They acted as if the officers were the ones behaving irrationally. As the children were removed from the house and taken to safety, the full scope of their suffering began to emerge. Medical examinations revealed decades of malnutrition, untreated injuries, cognitive impairment from abuse, and psychological trauma so severe that recovery would take years if it was even possible. Jordan's escape had saved not just her own life, but the lives of all 12 of her siblings. Her courage in climbing out that window and making that 911 call ended a nightmare that had lasted for decades. Chapter 4: The Unraveling Truth. As investigators dug deeper into the Turpin case, they discovered that the abuse had been going on for far longer than anyone initially realized. This wasn't a recent breakdown in parenting. This was systematic torture that had been happening for the children's entire lives. David and Louise had been abusing their children since the oldest was born in the late 1980s. They'd moved multiple times, from Texas to California, always keeping their children isolated and hidden from anyone who might intervene. Neighbors in previous locations reported similar observations. Pale, thin children who never played outside, never attended school, never interacted with other kids. But like the Paris neighbors, they'd rationalized away their concerns, or reported them to authorities who failed to follow up adequately. California's Department of Education had registered the Turpin home as a private school, which allowed David and Louise to claim they were homeschooling their children without any oversight or inspections. This legal loophole enabled them to keep their children completely isolated from any mandated reporters who might have noticed the abuse. Investigators found journals written by the children, documenting years of torture in heartbreaking detail. The older children, who could write, had recorded their experiences in secret, perhaps hoping someone would eventually find them and understand what they'd endured. These journals described daily starvation, beatings for minor infractions, psychological torture designed to break their spirits. They wrote about watching their parents eat full meals while they were given tiny portions, about being chained for weeks at a time, about the desperate hunger that never went away. The children had developed survival strategies to cope with their captivity. They would stay up all night and sleep during the day to avoid their parents. They would hoard any tiny scraps of food they could sneak. They would write stories and create imaginary worlds to escape mentally from their physical prison. When asked why they tortured their children, David and Louise showed no understanding that they'd done anything wrong. David claimed they were raising their children according to God's plan, and that strict discipline was necessary for salvation. Louise said they were protecting their children from the corrupting influence of the outside world. She actually believed she was a good mother. This complete lack of remorse or insight made them particularly dangerous. They genuinely didn't understand that starving, beating, and chaining children constitutes abuse. They thought they were righteous parents doing difficult but necessary work. Prosecutors charged David and Louise with 49 felony counts, including torture, false imprisonment, child cruelty, and abuse of dependent adults. The charges covered decades of systematic abuse against all 13 children. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical records, photographs, journals, testimony from the children, physical evidence from the house. There was no defense that could explain away what they'd done. In February 2019, David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 counts of torture, false imprisonment, and other charges in exchange for prosecutors dropping additional charges. They were immediately sentenced. David received life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Louise received the same sentence. They were both in their 50s, meaning they would likely die in prison. At sentencing, the judge called their crimes depraved and selfish, and noted that the psychological damage they'd inflicted on their children might never fully heal. Chapter 5. Freedom and Aftermath. For the Turpin children, freedom was both a gift and a challenge. After spending their entire lives in captivity, suddenly being thrust into the real world was overwhelming. The younger children were placed in foster care, where they received medical treatment, therapy, and education. Many of them had never attended a real school, never had friends their own age, never experienced normal childhood activities. The adult children faced even more difficult transitions. They were legally adults, but had the life skills of young children. They didn't know how to shop for groceries, pay bills, apply for jobs, or navigate basic social interactions. Social services provided support, but the system wasn't designed for victims like the Turpin siblings. They needed specialized, long-term care that stretched resources and challenged caseworkers. Jordan Turpin, the sister who escaped and called 911, became a spokesperson for her siblings and other abuse survivors. She gave interviews describing her experience and advocating for better protections for homeschooled children who might be suffering in isolation. In one powerful interview, Jordan said, "I'm not going to let my past define me. I'm going to define my future." The Turpin case sparked nationwide discussions about oversight of homeschooling and how to identify children at risk when they're not in public schools or other monitored environments. It also raised disturbing questions about how such extreme abuse can hide in suburban neighborhoods. How many neighbors saw warning signs but didn't report them? How many delivery people, utility workers, or service providers entered that house and saw nothing wrong? The children are still recovering, still learning what normal life looks like, still processing the trauma of their first 2 or 3 decades of life. Some have made remarkable progress, finishing high school, attending college, getting jobs. Others struggle with the psychological damage that may never fully heal. What happened to the Turpin children is one of the worst cases of prolonged child abuse in American history. But their story is also one of survival, courage, and the resilience of the human spirit. Jordan's bravery in escaping and calling for help saved her siblings. Her willingness to speak publicly has helped other abuse victims find their voices. So what do you think about this case? How could such extreme abuse remain hidden for so long in a modern suburban neighborhood? Subscribe to The Secret Chronicles as we continue exposing the horrors hiding behind closed doors and the survivors who refuse to be destroyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous monsters don't hide in dark alleys. They hide in normal-looking houses on quiet streets, behind smiles and family photos. The Turpin children survived the unimaginable. Their story reminds us to trust our instincts when something feels wrong, to speak up when we see potential abuse, and to never assume that a smiling family photo tells the whole story.